seminar of the ENA.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, obviously we got it. So welcome to the second seminar of our ENHS OHH C2I GSO seminar series. And so just to give you a little background, Dr. Miller, and I'll introduce our distinguished guest, Bonnie Miller, who's joining us today. So thank you very much. So we have a seminar series that is intended to provide an opportunity for our students and those that are interested to obtain a broader appreciation for what is public health. And these days we tend to refer to public health rather than environmental health because several years ago our accrediting body made some decisions about the role of environmental health, in particular in our curriculum. And the environmental health didn't warrant a specific silo as we talked about in academia. And we really took that to heart and began to realize that public health is environmental health and vice versa. And you really can't separate the two because of the connections between the environment and human health. And so now that's what we focus on. So we have folks with expertise and interest in a wide range of topics that come and engage with our students, our faculty, those online, etc. And as I said, we keep it very informal, and folks are encouraged to respectfully ask questions throughout. And at the end, I will also say that Dr. Miller has been a huge supporter of our School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina for as long as I've known him. And Dr. Miller did his undergraduate degree here with our marine science program back in the days when we had one of the leading marine science undergraduate programs in the country, which I can't say that anymore. But at the time of Dr. Miller, then Jerry Miller was here, it was just the premier undergraduate marine science program. And apparently back in those days, the distance between campus and our facility in Georgetown was much less than it is. They much more student and faculty engagement in Georgetown back in those days. And everyone take an opportunity to read Dr. Miller's bio, so I won't go through that. But what excites me about Dr. Miller being here today are some discussions that we've had recently about, as he's in quote unquote retirement, his willingness and interest in engaging with our students and younger faculty in helping to understand that your success is not just limited to what you do here on campus, but understanding of how things take place, how you need to engage beyond the bounds of campus. And when I started here, long before many of you were born, we actually had a pretty robust mentoring program where we spent a lot of time in DC learning how to engage with the federal funding agencies, with our congressmen or congressional delegations, etc. And we had the university planning. It was packed every time. We had weekly flights to DC. And for a variety of reasons, most of which are unbeknownst to me, we don't do that anymore. And we realize it's important once again to get our students, young faculty engaged and understanding. And so having expertise of folks like Dr. Standifer, who's on here, Admiral Gaffney, who lives 2 blocks away, who's on the 48th anniversary.
Yes, that's right.
Today, and Dr. Miller, who are willing to give their time and expertise back to our students and our faculty. With that, Jerry, you can add any additional introductory remarks you'd like, but otherwise, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, very good. I thank you, Dr. Porter, for that introduction and background. Let me first ask how many undergraduates we have in the room? How many graduate students? How many faculty? Okay, great. That's good. How do I get my slides going here?
Got you.
Share screen. Okay, here we go. And click share. Okay, well, share is grayed out. This one.
Maybe this one?
Ah, there we go. I had to select it.
Down here. This one?
The-
No.
The PowerPoint.
Oh, I should not be doing IT help. That is,
Okay,
oh,
here we go.
have the wrong.
So let me back up a little bit. This. Okay,
There you
so
go.
we got a clicker.
Yes,
We're
we do.
slides loaded. We're ready to go. Okay, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to speak with you folks. I'm going to burn through some slides pretty quickly because I want to leave a fair amount of time for discussion. And Dwayne, this is the point in time where you lock the door to prevent people from escaping, because there's going to be an in-class exercise. It's only going to take a couple of minutes of your time. But I want everybody to participate in that, including those who are watching via Zoom. I'm going to talk about some global challenges, the kind of interconnectedness of those. And along the way, I hope you'll see how your science, the issues that you're concerned about, can fit into that larger picture. And then towards the end, we'll talk about government engagement, the policymaking process, and how you can get your scientific information into the policymaking process in a way that will be good for us, good for you, good for the country, good for the world. So let me use the construct of sustainability to capture some of the high altitude homes for the kind of scientific information that you might bring to bear in the policymaking process. We talk these days a lot about sustainability. You probably hear about sustainability in the news occasionally. Back in the mid-'80s, that terminology was not nearly so common. In fact, it really originated in its modern form with when the Prime Minister of Norway, Ms. Gro Harlem Brundtland, volunteered to lead a United Nations Commission on Environment and Development. She and her colleagues on that commission spent a number of years working on this and ultimately defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. They described a threatened future in several different dimensions, and they urged the UN General Assembly to put together a plan of action to address what at that time they already saw as threatening trends with respect to the environment as development was progressing. Their report is captured in this book titled Our Common Future. And although it was written in the late 80s, it's still really quite relevant. It's easily available. You can Google Our Common Future. I would encourage you to read through its executive summary, look at its table of contents, and you'll probably be inspired to develop, to delve deeper into some of its chapters. These days, we think about sustainability as the intersection of these three spheres: the environmental, the social, and the economic. So natural resource use, pollution problems, our need to maintain the standard of living, equal opportunity issues, and then on the economic side, profit, economic growth, et cetera. And there are dimensions of interest in pairs of these spheres. In the social and environmental realm, things like environmental justice, which is getting a lot of good attention these days. So we can sort of use this framework, and ultimately we're looking for positive developments in all three of these spheres, that is at the intersection of these spheres, so that we can get on with letting people live good, productive lives, supporting their own needs in a way that doesn't degrade the possibilities for others now and in the future. But we have a lot of challenges, and I'm going to go through a number of them here. And as I do, think about the kind of science, the kind of research that you might be interested in, and begin to imagine how it might be more broadly applicable at a higher level, both locally, nationally, and globally. The first thing I'll mention is the growing human population. When I was born in the mid-1950s, we had less than 3 billion people on Earth. Now, I just read yesterday that the projections are that we will reach 8 billion people around November 15th of this year. So that's more than 100% increase in human population on Earth just in my lifetime. Actually, just in the last 50 years, which is a little bit less than my lifetime. Similarly, in those same 50 years, the per capita energy consumption has increased by more than 50%. So we've got a lot more people on Earth, and on average, each of us is using 50% more energy than we did 50 years ago. And the same is true with the use of water. Water is probably the most fundamental natural element that we have on Earth, and its use is up more than 100% in the last 50 years. It's not all bad news. That rapid increase in population is projected to stop. Population should stabilize, maybe even begin to decrease a little bit around the end of this century, perhaps into the beginning of next century. That is, the rate of population growth is trending towards zero. So at least that part of our huge set of problems seems to be bounded. We hope it's bounded in a graceful way. That is, we hope that the human population can stabilize without there being huge famine and other such undesirable disruptive phenomena. As population has increased, so has urbanization. Again, when I was a youngster, about 2/3 of the global human population lived in rural areas, 1/3 in urban areas. That's changed radically in the last 50 years. In fact, around 2007, we humans became a majority urban species. And that has fundamental implications for how humans are provided with their essential needs, and how, or if we can maintain that in a sustainable fashion going forward. There are positive things to urbanization and a number of negative factors, which we could go into on some other occasion. Here's what urbanization looks like. The big red blobs are mega cities of 10 million people or more. And with the exception of Antarctica, there is no continent on Earth that isn't being impacted by megacities. I've had the pleasure of visiting a number of these places around the world. Sao Paulo, Brazil, for instance, now as its population is so huge that it's hard to count the people. It's estimated to be in excess of 20 million people. And of course, the northeast of the US has grown into a mega city. Several cities in India, the Far East, etc. And well, all of those people need to eat. In particular, we need protein. An increasing fraction of that protein is being withdrawn from the ocean. In the upper right corner of this slide, you can see that there are fewer and fewer fish stocks that are underfished. There are a great many that are fully fished, and an increasing number that are overfished. And on the lower right, you see in the blue bars the relative contribution of aquaculture and capture fisheries. Capture fisheries, wild caught fish, in other words, is indicated by the blue bars, and you can see that's sort of plateaued in recent decades. The yellow bars show fish from aquaculture, and that has grown. And in fact, that's the sole source of the increasing supply of fish for human consumption. So our natural system is being taxed, pretty much tapped out at its current levels of extraction, and aquaculture is stepping into the equation. Further on the ocean, you've probably seen this quote from a few years ago. There will be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. I just found that to be an astounding statistic. It's reliable. This claim has been reviewed and debated in recent years, and it stands up to scrutiny. You've all heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, probably. And here's an example of a coastal area. I think this is in India, but there are a great many places like this around the world. And plastic was only invented in 1898, only began to be mass produced in the 1960s. So in about 100 years, this purely man-made substance will have grown to equal an entire naturally occurring biological group that has existed for millions of years and on which we humans now intimately depend. So we need to pay attention to this. We have to make sure that our use of the ocean is sustainable because we depend on it intimately. We also depend on the ocean for a great many other things. Most people don't think about seaborne trade when we're talking about impacts on the ocean, but these are truly phenomenal numbers. About 90% of the stuff that you find in your local big box store, Costco or Walmart, arrive on US shores in ships from other nations. There are currently more than 90,000 ships, cargo ships, in the global commercial fleet. And their capacity in total is about 2 billion tons of cargo. And that has doubled since 2007. So again, this particular use of our ocean is increasing by leaps and bounds. And the global freight trade is estimated to more than triple by 2050. We know that shipping has significant impacts in coastal areas, port cities, and in particular, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have tremendous pollution problems because of ship operations, and then the trucking operations associated with offloading cargo from those ships. So think about that as part of the sustainability picture for those not only in our country, but around the world. Looking at land degradation is an increasingly difficult issue. 3 decades ago, about 15% of the world's land surface was degraded. More recently, that's up to 24%. About 20% of cultivated areas are degraded. That is, the land is no longer as capable of producing crops as it used to be. And about 1.5 billion people depend on those degraded areas. And the image on the lower left is change in primary productivity over about 22 years, 1981 through 2003. The red areas show decline in primary productivity. Green areas, the Amazon and the Congo Basin, and then the sort of light green in places like the US is reflective of our agricultural practices, but we see a lot of red in this picture. So not only is land being degraded, we can see the primary productivity being negatively affected in lots of places around the world. The image on the right is desertification. On the African continent, the Saharan desert is growing southward. You can see that in the red areas. The western part of the US is desertifying, as well as places in the Middle East and Central Asia. Further on land, deforestation is an increasing issue. You probably can't see the details in the upper left image, but the tall spikes are high income countries. And that's really where deforestation is a significant problem. But in upper middle and lower middle income countries, it's significant as well. About 30% of global forest has been cleared. About 20% has been degraded. A large fraction of the remaining 50% is fragmented, meaning that populations, particularly of animals that need contiguous forest areas, are finding it to be more and more difficult to make their livings. And only about 15% of forest is currently left intact. Water stress and scarcity. You've probably read in the news lately, some of our cities out in the western part of the US are having water problems. This is aside from Jackson, Mississippi, which has its problems because of a totally different type of lack of sustainability. But lack of rainfall, change in weather patterns due to climate change is further stressing areas that were already dry in the western part of our country and in many other places around the world. I'll just draw your attention to the panel at the bottom of this slide. About 36% of humans live in areas that are under water stress. About 22% of global gross domestic product, our economy, is in areas where water stress is high. So if we think again about the environmental impacts for humans, and then also the economic impacts for humans, water stress and scarcity is a big part and a growing part of the picture. 37 countries now face extremely high levels of water stress, and you can see those indicated in the map. Just a couple of examples. Each of us humans can use about 2,800 calories for a healthy diet every day. It takes about 1,000 cubic meters of water to produce 2,800 calories. That's, I think, roughly twice the volume of this room that we're in. So every night before you go to sleep, thank Mother Nature for 2 roomfuls of water, because that's what it takes to provide your diet. On the lower left, just another example, it takes almost 3,000 gallons of water to produce a pair of jeans. So after you thank Mother Nature at night, you can get up and thank her again in the morning for the clothes that you're about to put on, because production of textiles requires also a lot of water. Just those daily needs, food and clothing. Shelter, we could talk about shelter and its demand on water if you like. And now with those examples, I want to segue into a little discussion of how all of these things are kind of interconnected for all of us. And I want to highlight the complexity in those interactions. To do that, I like to use the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll start with the thing that we hear a lot about these days, and that's climate change. Well, you probably all easily imagine or know that if you're talking about climate, you're talking about things happening in the ocean and on land. Some of those we just talked about. Well, with those 3 things, we Also think about climate in terms of the use of energy. So there's a direct connection between climate and particularly the burning of fossil fuels. Well, when we do those things, why do we do those things? We need energy for our daily lives. We need energy for our jobs. We need energy for transportation. Energy is required to support industry and infrastructure so that we have good jobs and a reasonable rate of economic growth to support ourselves and our families and our fellow human beings. And well, we want to do that because we'd really like to do something about poverty. And one of the reasons that we'd like to address poverty around the world is to eliminate hunger and to create opportunities for good health and well-being. Well, if we're going to have good health and well-being, people need to be on board. People need to be educated in various ways. We need to have gender equity. In fact, we need to reduce inequalities across the board so that we can bring all of these things from nature and from man-made processes into sustainable cities and sustainable communities. And if we're going to have sustainable communities, we need clean water and sanitation. We need to have responsible consumption and production. And if we get all of these things going, there will be synergy such that we have greater chances of living in a peaceful and just world. Now, I started with climate. You could take your scientific arena. You could take the concerns that you have about the environment or about health, and find the right box to start with your issue, your concern. And just through a similar thought process like I just went through, I'm sure that you can connect your interest, your concerns to every other box in this graphic. So it's a complex, interconnected system, and we need to have all of these elements working positively together to improve the human condition around the world and our condition here at home. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We want to talk about your issues, how you can address them, how you can bring your scientific knowledge and background into the policymaking arena to help improve matters. And first, I want to talk about issue identification and agenda building. These things don't just happen naturally. It requires a lot of thought and a lot of work to do this. And I want to walk through some truisms that you should be aware of. First, few issues actually make it onto policy agendas, but those that do are often the result of public outcry, crises, and the lobbying effort of important interest groups. That is, when people speak up for one reason or another, that helps to raise issues to an altitude that perhaps they can make it onto a policymaking agenda. The second point is that, and this is almost a no-brainer, but I think people need to hear it. Issues need to become agenda items for policymaking bodies in order to proceed to the next step of the policy process. That is, somebody has to pay attention. A policymaking body has to recognize that it's their responsibility to address a particular issue. And then finally, once you have a policy agenda, you have to realize that it's ephemeral. My personal experience with this, I came a little more than a decade ago. I was hired to go to the White House and help put together our country's first national ocean policy. And about a year into that process, we had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. That, of course, sucked all the oxygen out of the room. We had to pay attention to that crisis. We had to get it under control. And that simply took a lot of time, money, and people to kind of deal with that crisis and then turn attention back to our national ocean policy effort. Now, it wasn't all bad. You might have heard the advice that you should never waste a good crisis. Having had that crisis, we were able, in fact, to shine a little bit bigger spotlight on the need for ocean policy in our country and elsewhere around the world. Policy formulation. Once you've sort of gone through what I talked about in the last slide, there are a few things that need to be borne in mind. First, policy formulation, good policy formulation will provide policymakers with choices for resolving issues that are on their agenda. It's, I suppose, useful, but not easy if you articulate only one solution. Policymakers need options. And those options need to be based on good analysis that identifies the most effective ways to move ahead, ways plural, and they need to be targeted and articulated in a way that those who have the political authority to do something about the issue can latch on to them and take them forward. And that gets us to implementation. When a policy is articulated, it's blessed from on high. It's ready for implementation, and blessed by, whoever's in charge. It could be a local official. It could be the President of the United States. It could be anyone in between. That person, that responsible authority needs to articulate the policy to those in the relevant governing body that has the power to enact it. If you look throughout our federal government, we have a multitude of agencies that have responsibility for various things, environmental, social, and economic. But sometimes there's not a logical entity already in existence. If that's the case, then the lead in the policy world needs to have the gumption to stand up a new entity, a new agency that has the capabilities to carry out the given policy, and they must be not only established, but staffed and resourced in ways that can get on with business. Similarly, even within that organization, say it's a policy that comes down from the White House, and the EPA is the relevant entity to get on with it. The head of EPA, other subordinate leaders within EPA need to communicate clearly what the policy is and what the implementation plan is, so that people in their organization can effectively get on with implementing it. And I think I've already alluded to resources. If you have a responsibility for implementing a policy, you must also be resourced properly to do it. That gets us into the realm of Congress and appropriations, or in your state government, people down the street in the state house here, to put the proper resources on to the problem so that the responsible entity can get on with business. And as that entity is given a new responsibility, it has to be done in a way that doesn't negate or disrupt their pre-existing responsibilities. Sometimes that's a tall order. Now, okay, I'm giving you a little warning here. We're going to have a 2-minute in-class assignment in a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you a little guidance, though, before we jump into that. What you're going to do is write a 30-second elevator speech. So think about what your favorite issue or concern is, and imagine which policymaker needs to know about that, which policymaker needs to do something about that, And I'm going to ask you to write a short speech, 10 seconds on what action is required and 20 seconds on what the expected outcomes are. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why those two elements are so important. But first, let's talk about possible issues. I would rather you not choose one of the issues that I've put on the screen here, but you can if you want to, if it's really your favorite issue. But things that we hear about in the news recently: sea level rise, heat stroke, power demand, flash flood problems, sewage outfall problems, pollution of various types. And then think about the policymaker. It could be the mayor of a city. It could be the head of a national government. It could be a senator. It could be the administrator of NOAA. It could be a Navy admiral. Through that info, Paul Gaffney, but he's not here. It could be the president of a corporation setting corporate policy, or the head of a funding agency, and so forth. So think about the target for your elevator speech. And as you develop the background that will ultimately be distilled into an elevator speech, you can think about the kind of information you need. What's needed? What do we need to know in order to articulate a policy? It could be information about population or about infrastructure, about some area of economics. It could be water resources, etc. And to develop that information, you need research and data. Where will that come from? It could be from sources like the National Census. It could be business projections. It could be environmental dynamics such as E. coli on the beaches versus tourism dollars. It could be drought, other historical or forecasts. You're going to need to have data on which you can perform some research to develop the information that's needed to formulate policy. When the research is completed and papers or books are written, or if you're a student, you've read them, that written by somebody else, you then have knowledge to impart for the benefit of society. And I would bet right now, everyone in this room knows something that a policymaker should be aware of. So, it's not, if you're just a beginning graduate student, don't think you have no role to play in this. As you go through your studies, you learn things from the courses that you take, and those can be relevant to policymaking on issues of emerging concern. I always suggest that people outline a short 10-minute presentation, a couple of slides describing what the issue is, a slide on who is the targeted policymaker. That is, who do you think can do something about the issue? And then closely combined with that, why that particular policymaker. If you're thinking about a senator or a congressman, it might be that they serve on the Senate Environment Committee or the House Public Works Committee, or on the committee that oversees Health and Human Services. So think about why that particular policymaker. And then a couple of slides on the scientific argument itself. All that data, the research, the results that you've come up with, or that you've read that somebody else has come up with, summarize that in a couple of slides. And then a slide on what action is desired and what the expected outcomes are. You recognize those final two bullets as the contents of your 30-second elevator speech. And just to hammer this point home a little bit further, those of us who grew up in the scientific world, we're used to writing papers or putting together presentations that start with an introduction. You review the previous literature, you describe your methods. Ultimately, towards the end of the paper, you get to results and conclusions. Well, that's sort of the opposite of what you need when you're dealing with a policymaker. The graphic on the right comes from the news writing world, but in fact, you are intending to impart news to a policymaker that he or she needs to hear. So the philosophy is bottom line up front. Your results and conclusion go right at the beginning of your engagement. You would hope to have time in that engagement to articulate the implications of those results, because that's what the policymaker is going to care about ultimately. And then finally, later, if you're asked, you might have a chance to talk about your research and the details and the methods and so forth that underpin the things that are higher in this inverted pyramid. So now we're going to get on to the assignment. 10 seconds, that equates to about 20 or 25 words on what action is desired. And that in turn usually equates to articulating what the problem is. What do you want this policymaker to do something about? The next 20 seconds, that's 40 or 50 words on the expected outcomes. That is, what is the solution? What's going to be done that will be good for the policymaker's constituents? If you're talking about an administrator in EPA, they might not be thinking so much about constituents, but about showing that they're getting on with their responsibilities of their office. Now, I'm going to give you an example, and I'll read this for you. Ranchers are often frustrated by the effort that it takes to hand shear their Angora alpacas. Drone clip eliminates the need to chase, restrain, and trim these beautiful beasts. For over 5 years, alpaca farmers have trusted drone clip to provide the best solutions in alpaca ranching. With our safe and reliable drone aircraft, you can spend less time shearing and manage a larger herd. So this is a sales pitch, obviously. But what you're attempting to do when you talk to a policymaker is to sell your issue and your idea for how to improve on that issue to the policymaker. So your elevator speech is a sales pitch. Here you're articulating the problem in the first couple of sentences. Even though the second sentence mentions the solution, drone clip, it's still really fleshing out what the problem is. The need to chase, restrain, and trim the beasts. And the second half is the solution. You've got 5 years of experience. Alpaca farmers love drone clip. It gets the job done for them. It's safe and reliable. And you can spend less time shearing and then manage a larger herd. So that sort of gets on with business. In fact, it's good for business because you're able to manage a larger herd. So think about that combination, the problem and the solution, as you draft your 30-second elevator speech on whatever your issue of interest happens to be. And let me just give you an off-the-cuff example. The clock hasn't started yet, you don't have to worry. Let's say you are talking to the regional director of EPA, or maybe you're talking to someone at DHEC just down the street here. And the problem is PCBs in the local rivers. So you could say, Mr. Administrator, we recognize that PCBs are an issue because it causes problems for our local recreational fishermen and is negatively impacting the public use of rivers for recreational purposes. So that's a problem. That's an economic problem. It's a human problem. Now the solution. Dr. Porter at USC has invented a PCB sponge, and he's taken it through the applied research stage. We think your environment agency ought to be planning a policy that will lead to a program for deploying Dr. Porter's PCB sponges first in the Saluda River, because that's where the problem is the worst. And by the way, his sponge has an efficiency of 80%, so we can probably clean up a pretty good fraction of the problem in the Saluda. And well, the Congaree River is downstream from there, so it's got the same problem. But if you deal with Saluda, you're going to solve half of the problem in the Congaree. And well, eventually your program perhaps can grow to cover the Broad River as well. And then you've solved 90% of the problem in the Congaree. And that'll be good for business, good for public health. So that's it. So dream up an elevator speech of your own. Here again are the sort of guiding principles. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. We have about 8 minutes left in the hour, and I want to sort of discuss a couple of the examples that you come up with, and then have a little open Q&A beyond that. And you're not exempt from this. There you go.
Right, the mind, but starting with your sustainable development goals slide, everything forward to that, using a bit of different terminology, is exactly what we're embedding in the public health leadership course that we do. What we're doing this semester with a community engagement science translation course. We're doing with the initiative that Dr. Sanford and I have with EJ Strong. And so we couldn't have asked you to do a better job of supporting or providing a positive spin on what we're doing.
Good. By the way, those on Zoom are not exempt either. I'm going to call on one or two of you as well. Yeah, please go ahead.
How we make an elevator speech that comes like a scientist to a policy maker that does not sound so scientific, because I can say, but what I think is my research is in video because of the political study, not in bacteria. But how I can translate that to a policy maker that probably when I take video, that cannot switch like that is bacteria. Is a way that we need to reword what we want to say, like maybe like we have a problem with a marine bacteria or a pathogen in our coast. Because sometimes I know that it's difficult for the scientific community to transfer our knowledge to the policymakers. How is there any advice that we can use in that way?
Yeah, so if the issue is bad microbes in the environment, then there is a state agency, there's a federal agency, maybe even a local agency whose responsibility it is. So you need to do a little homework to find out who in those agencies is responsible for that area. And as you do that homework, you will probably see what their current initiatives are. And then you can imagine how adding your scientific knowledge into their current equation would improve what they're doing. So kind of start where they are. And if you do that, you'll have an immediate connection to the policymaker. And you'll look like, to them, you'll look like a resource of information that they can use to do a better job at what they're already responsible for. So that's a way to sort of get it to a level that, where you're not talking about the 7th decimal place of some estimate that you've made or some particular scientific method, but bring it into a more tangible form for the policymaker. So I think our time is going to run short here. Let me just ask.
We should have someone who's ready online.
Excuse me?
We have someone online who's ready to share their.
Okay, so let's go to Zoom land.
If you can stop sharing.
Yep. Okay.
Hello,
Okay,
can
so
you hear me?
that's sharing.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question or articulate your speech.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Emily with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. So
Great.
my speech is going to be on harmful algal blooms. We know that HABs are an increasing problem, especially throughout South Carolina. We've had recreational advisories on Lake Welchel, Lake Wiley, Lake Rabun, Goose Creek Reservoir, as well as taste and odor issues on the Broad River and Lake Murray. So I'm proposing that when the Department of Health and Environmental Control eventually splits up into two different entities for the public health and the environmental science, with the environmental science department, I'm proposing that we have a specific program dedicated to HABs. I'm a one-person department, so if we have a program that is dedicated to HABs with more funding, we can hire more people to increase our sampling efforts across the state, as well as our capabilities on what to sample and promote a better and healthy environment, I guess, waters for the state.
Okay, that sounds good. Tell me who you were talking to.
I was talking to the, well, at this time, the Senate.
Yeah. Okay. Have you actually done that?
No.
Are you allowed to do that within the bureaucracy of your agency?
Me personally, no. I'd probably have to run it up the chain.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so theoretically, I would probably have to talk to my Bureau of Water chief, who then would bring it to the head of DHEC or the head of environmental affairs, who then would bring it to the Senate.
Okay, good. So I think it's a good concept to pursue, but do make sure that it's pitched to at the right level for the immediate target you're going after. Let me go to somebody in the room here, and we have just a couple of minutes left. So raise your hand who wants to do their 30 seconds.
I'll do my 30 seconds.
Okay, so tell us who you're talking to and give us your 10 seconds and then your 20 seconds.
Okay, I would be speaking to either a congressional member with a large agricultural group of constituents, or somebody at the state level with the USDA.
Okay, good. So far away.
Agribusiness is the largest economic sector in South Carolina, but land degradation is a huge issue for producers, the environment, and food security. Practices that support soil health, such as regenerative agriculture, benefit both the planet and food systems by sequestering carbon, improving water infiltration, and more. With increasing climate pressures and agricultural needs, we need to reevaluate our agricultural research and policies to ensure that they're not only a priority in the state, but they're also supporting instead of excluding producers using environmentally conscious practices such as regenerative agriculture.
Okay, that's pretty good. I heard the problem. I heard some elements of solution. So that's good. Anybody else? Just one last example before we close out.
I can try.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
This isn't my current.
Tell us who you are and who you're talking to.
Oh, I'm Dea. I'm talking to, I guess, some funding agency with DHEC.
Yeah, okay, good, go ahead.
Somebody that can come. But this isn't my current research. This is research. This is what's going on in the world today.
Okay, good.
So oysters are dying at a high rate currently in South Carolina and even North Carolina. This may be due to a disease in oysters called derma. I just watched an oyster farmer lose well over $80,000 in a single summer. If we can analyze if we can analyze several farms along the coast, and then we can determine if it's derma disease and if that's what's causing the mass mortality, and then I can add that future work to my current work that's looking at climate change and linking the mortalities that we're seeing today.
Okay, good. So again, I heard problem and I heard activity that would get towards a solution. And since it's targeted towards a funding agency, it's really kind of in the sales pitch mode. You're not really asking them to establish some new policy or to modify an old policy, but to get on with business in a way that would spend their money wisely. Yeah. Okay, so we're essentially out of time. I would take any sort of general questions that anyone has, and I'm happy to stay around afterwards to chat with anyone who's interested.
Okay.
So any last minute questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So I was wondering in selecting who you would be talking to. I know that a lot of us maybe we're interested in talking to a congressman or a congressional body, but so much of the actual implementation comes down to an agency level. And so I know we mentioned that too. So I guess my question is, in selecting who you talk to, how do you decide really whether to go with an agency official or like the people who tell the agency people what to do and give them money?
Well, that's a good question. And you can answer that by doing a little homework on the relevant agency. Do they already have a program ongoing in the arena that is relevant? Or do they need to modify an existing program? Or do they need to create something that's brand new? If it's the former, then probably the right target is the person who's responsible for implementing that program within the agency. If you have a good engagement with that individual, you might be asked to go with him or her to their boss, which then leads more to a discussion about resources to get on with, with next steps and so forth. And if it's a really big ask, then yeah, maybe you need to go to to the Senate or the Congress to help the agency get both direction and resources to execute on what there is. What are our constraints on time here? Can we go a little bit longer?
Yeah,
Or
good.
people needing to come into this room?
I think there's a class in here because there's a lady that just came in and walked out. And there's people waiting outside, so I think there might be something in here soon.
Okay, so we'll wrap it pretty quickly then. Yeah. While she's checking, I'll just say that Dr. Porter has my contact information. I'm happy to talk to any of you at any time. Just send me an email. We'll be happy to have a chat. If folks are still online, I think some are, the offer goes to you as well. Just get in touch if you'd like to chat. 1:10. Okay, so we've got just a couple of minutes. Any other more general questions before I quit? Anyone on Zoom need to ask a question?
No, but I will say thank you for such a wonderful presentation. You've gotten a lot of thanks in the chat.
Okay, can we save the chat? And I'd like to see it after the fact. Yeah.
I thought one of the hard things for the pitch is that when you're looking at something so big, like I also was writing about harmful algals.
Yeah.
Like you can talk about the economic, environmental, and public health impacts, but it varies so much based on like the species, the geographic location, the people that it's around, if it produces toxins or not. And then so once you've said all of that, you're out of your words and you can't maybe talk about a specific species or location. So it's like, do I talk about like, because most people don't know about harmful algals. So do you talk about, do you introduce it and like the big picture, or do you get to the specifics first?
Yeah. So that's where you.
Like, can you put?
Yeah. So that's where you need to do some homework on the individual you're going to be talking to. You don't want to talk over their head, and you don't want to present something that's so elementary to them that you're just repeating what they already know. So you need to know the person that you are talking to and include the level of detail that's going to be recognizable and usable by that individual.
But if you do research and you feel like you still don't know, is it like best to do like you bring like a flyer with you and give them the flyer and your talk, or like?
Yeah, so we didn't have time to get into all of this, but when you meet with someone, it's always useful to leave a one-pager behind. And when you leave a one-pager behind, you darn well better have the 10-pager back in your office, because if they're really interested, they'll want to know what the background is, or they will at least want a demonstration that you know what the background is. So you need to have those kinds of things in your hip pocket in case you're asked for them. So 30-second elevator speech, a one-pager that you leave with the person, and then the real background. And if it's not your own research, maybe it's just your summary of research that was done by other people that you have summarized. Yeah. And I want to circle back quickly to the question over here about who do you talk to? People in positions of responsibility generally are pretty busy. So don't be put off if you make an approach and the response is, talk to my assistant next month. Or, that's, regard that as a foot in the door, not as a put down. And it's especially true if you're dealing with senators and congressmen in DC. They're just pulled from one thing to the next, in a matter of minutes. Typically, if you approach a senator or congressman's office, you're going to end up talking to an assistant legislative affairs person. And if that person thinks that what you've told them is really relevant and a good thing for the member to engage in, he'll take it to their chief of staff. If the chief of staff likes it, might get in touch with you, might say, okay, we need to set aside 5 minutes on the senator's agenda 3 weeks from now so that he can hear about this. So don't expect to start at the top. Plug in where a person is going to be knowledgeable enough of the subject that you're bringing to them and capable of latching on to what you're telling them. So I think we better wrap it up. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to all of you on Zoom. Paul, good to see you again.
And like Dr. Miller said,
Excellent job, Jerry. Thank you. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you should give this presentation sometime, Paul.
No, I just learned a lot. Thank you.
You have much more experience in this realm than I do.
Nicely done.
Anybody